At the age of 19, I was arrested and charged with murder, kidnapping, armed robbery, and grand theft. In the first 3 years of my incarceration, I spent in the county jail, awaiting trial. And in those 3 years, Jesus pursued me and ultimately captured me about a year and a half in. The reality was that at the age of 19, I was going to spend the rest of my life in prison. And I want to fast forward to a couple of years later. I'm now in the prison that I'm going to spend 12 years in. My job assignment at this time was I was the chaplain's aide. So I worked for the chaplain and I taught Bible studies. I was the worship leader. I preached on the weekends that he wasn't there. And by all intents and purposes, I was like the head Christian in the prison. I was the top guy. But I had a secret. I was just hiding something that I didn't want people to know about me because I was ashamed. John 8:36 says this, "So if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed." And there's a reality of freedom that we all need to step into that hopefully I'm going to make you a little bit more aware of today. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, I would volunteer to work in the clinic. And there's a guy in the clinic, his name was Doc Martin. He was a 50-plus-year-old guy who was super friendly and a great conversationalist. We got along really, really well. And on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, I didn't volunteer because there was a guy that worked with him. He was a physician's assistant whose name was Joe. And Joe was a jerk, and he was very condescending, and Joe didn't like me, and I didn't like Joe. And so usually he's not there on Tuesdays and Thursdays, but on this Tuesday he was there. And he asked the question and brought up the subject that no convict ever wants to hear or talk about. He said, "Hey, you know what Wilson's in for?" Doc didn't seem to care all that much, but Joe was just kind of pressing it. He said, "Yeah, he's in for murder." And of course, the way of that, I'm starting to feel the shame and just kind of clamming up. And then finally he lets out the real big truth. He said, "Yeah, he killed a doctor." In that moment, I just couldn't say anything because I was carrying the shame of that crime that I committed. Now here's a dichotomy that's going on here. 3 years prior to that, I surrendered my life to the Lord. He fully forgave me and set me free. And I was walking in the blessing and the favor of God. I was growing in the Lord. I was building my relationship with the Lord. All that was happening. But in this moment, the reality was the shame of, if you would ask me personally who I was, feeling the shame of a person who took part in taking another man's life. And I'm feeling it. I never answered the question. He just looked at me. He kind of knew without the answer that it was true. And then he said, "You need to leave." And he kicked me out. I walked out that clinic door and the weight of it was just on me. I was sitting there trying to collect myself. I could hear my father's voice. I'm the youngest of 5. And growing up, I'm not even sure he knew my name because what he called me all the time was stupid. I was stupid. "You're stupid. You're stupid." It was a tape that played in my head all the time. Just thinking about that day the crime was committed and just the bad choice after bad choice. The things that I was doing that even led me there. Like, how stupid can you be? And I'm sitting in that chapel because this doctor that I barely knew had kicked me out, and the shame of my life was just on me. And I was a believer. And in those 5 years, not one time to one person did I ever speak out of my mouth what I did that day. I was too ashamed of it. I was too embarrassed by it. That was the thing I didn't want anybody to know. And God begins to speak to me. He's like, "What are you doing?" I'm feeling all the feels and stuff. I'm wallowing in my shame. In the news, the anchor man comes up. My picture shows up in the top corner over his left shoulder. And this is what he said. He said, "This guy is the scum of the earth, and he deserves any punishment." When he said, "This guy's the scum of the earth," in that moment, I agreed with him. And even after Jesus redeemed me and forgave me, I still owned that. And here's what I know. I'm here to tell you some really, really good news. Jesus can set you free from that. I walked back across that multi-purpose area, knocked on the door of the clinic. Doc opens it. He sees me and said, "Doc, I need to talk to you." It was one of the most difficult things I think I've ever done is speaking out loud the details of the part that I played in the crime that I committed. And I got finished, and he looked at me and he goes, "You done?" And I went, "Yeah." And he goes, "Okay, get out." I was like, "Okay." So I walked out, and I'm walking across that multipurpose area again to the chapel, but this walk felt different. I wasn't feeling the heaviness of that shame. Something had come off me, and I didn't even realize what it was in the moment, but God was doing something in my heart. And God said, "Listen, I'll deal with Doc Martin, right? This isn't about him. This is about you." I didn't understand in that moment the power of confession of just letting it out, of bringing what was in the dark and in the secret in my heart to the light. But I was feeling it. Somehow that shame wasn't as heavy in that moment. And in that moment, the Holy Spirit said to me, he said, Robert, I want to tell you what I think of you. And here's God saying, Robert, I love you. You're one of my favorites. Started talking about his purposes and his plans for me. And in a moment, I realized God had set me up. He used Joe, the jerk, to expose something in me that was holding me captive and holding me in bondage and that had a lid over my life. If the Son sets you free, you're free indeed. Because Jesus set me free. Who told you that you would never amount to anything? It was one of three voices. It was either the world, or it was your flesh, or it's the devil. What are the voices you're listening to in your life? Are they holding you captive?